Have you been diagnosed with hip osteoarthritis and are experiencing pain on the inside of your leg or in your groin area? You may even be experiencing tightness right in the front of your hip. Well, if you are, I'm glad you're here because in this video, I'm going to tell you the one exercise to avoid if you're experiencing this pain that's commonly prescribed, and then 3 things to try instead. So my name's Alyssa, if we haven't met before. I'm a doctor of physical therapy and I specialize in helping people with osteoarthritis. My whole goal of this channel is to give you hope and show you that you have options for pain relief besides surgery. Before we get into these movements, I just want to talk very briefly about why you may be experiencing pain, because I think it's important in order to actually understand why these movements can be helpful. You have a few muscles in the front of your hip. One that starts from actually your spine, which can explain some lower back pain if you're experiencing it, but comes down and helps to flex your hip. So hip flexion is swinging your leg forward like this, and then also bringing your knee up. Both of those are considered hip flexion. Your leg is moving in front of your body. Now you can imagine when you're walking, you rely a lot on hip flexion, bringing that leg forward. But your hip moves in 3 directions. So it does move forward, it helps the leg move sideways, and then it helps the leg move backwards. Now, think about your daily movement, the direction that you're commonly moving. And let me tell you, I can probably guess what it is. Moving forward. As humans, we spend a lot of time moving in a forward direction. And then if you're using walking for a primary form of exercise, there's more forward walking or forward moving. So do you see a pattern here? We spend a lot of time moving forward. Then you add hip arthritis to the mix, you add pain to the mix, you add muscle imbalance to the mix, and you may start limping. So if I had pain on my right hip, a lot of times you'll notice that your body doesn't want to spend a lot of time on that right leg, because that's our way of our body adapting. But when you're walking and you start to experience limping, you have to use quite a bit of power to really kind of heave your leg forward. So when we're commonly spending a lot of time moving forward and then adding a change to our movement, adding a limp, these muscles in the front of your hip can get really irritated. So this is going to lead me into the first movement, the movement that you should avoid. Okay, let's talk about a movement that I would recommend avoiding if you're having groin pain or experiencing pain or tightness in the front of your hip. This is a movement that's commonly prescribed, and this is not saying this movement is bad. This movement does have a time and a place, especially if you have knee pain or hip pain, spend a lot of time sitting. It can be beneficial, but this is one that I would maybe avoid if you are experiencing groin pain. This movement right here. You're going to extend your leg straight out, and then you're going to lift it up, lift it straight up. Now, this movement is considered hip flexion. If we think about what we just talked about what muscles are working and they may be overused, this movement right here is asking the muscles in the fronts of those legs to do a lot. You're lifting that leg against gravity. So you can see why this movement may not be the best choice for you right now. Again, not saying it's bad, not saying you should never do it, but we have to decrease that groin pain first. So instead, I'm going to show you 3 movements that you can try that are going to help relieve some of that pain. Number 1 is going to be backwards stepping. Now, if you do not feel confident in your balance, if you are having higher levels of pain, or just if this is a new movement to you, I would highly recommend having support nearby, whether it's a chair, a kitchen counter, something stable to help as we move through these movements. For this first one, we're going to add in some backwards movement. So I'm going to show you two different variations of doing this. The first one is facing support, where you have two-hand support so you can keep your chest upright. Now, when we step backwards, we can alternate at first, just like this. So I want you to step backwards just as far as feels comfortable. Now you may feel a stretch in the front of your hip, and that's okay. The idea is we want to put those muscles on stretch and then contract them by moving forward. When you move forward, you just want to meet your feet at the same point. Meaning, I don't want you to necessarily then step forward, because that's getting a little bit more into that hip flexion. So I just want you to step forward so you meet the other foot. You can also stand on one leg and then step backwards and come back. Step backwards and come back. Another way to do this is to just use one-handed support. So if I'm going to stand on my left and then step backwards with the right, I'd like the support to be on the right side, the side of the leg that's moving. That's going to give you a little bit more support versus if it was on this side, a lot of times I see some leaning and some compensations. So I always try to have it on the side of the leg that's moving. Stepping backwards and then coming forwards. Doing anywhere between 10 to 20 repetitions at first can be a great place to start. Now you can incorporate this if you're standing at the counter doing something, if you're brushing your teeth, just starting to incorporate some backwards movement, whether you're alternating or staying on one side and just stepping that way. That's going to work your gluteal muscles. So there's 3 layers of the gluteal muscles, and the first layer is one of the most powerful, and that works on leg extension, meaning your leg is moving behind your body. So that's the muscle that we're focusing on in this movement, because we're trying to get support of the hip on all sides, which is going to move us into the second movement, which is sideways. So again, you can start with two-handed support. All we're going to do is just step out to the side and come back. Step out to the side and come back. Now I'll show you from the front. You're going to step out to the side and come back. Again, you're just stepping out as far as is comfortable. And it may feel weird at first, it may feel tight, just because we don't move sideways very often. So just take it to whatever you can tolerate. This should not significantly increase pain. If it does, minimize the range of motion that you're stepping or use more support. Now, the second layer of those gluteal muscles is the gluteus medius, which helps us move sideways. And there are a couple of other muscles that are involved in that. So now, you're just stepping, again, about 10 to 20 repetitions at a time, whatever you can tolerate right now. We don't want to overdo it. Now we've addressed the backwards movement and the sideways movement. So those are two very simple things you can start incorporating throughout the day to help take some pressure off the fronts of the legs. Now, moving into number 3. This one I do recommend having a chair for. We're essentially trying to combat the forward direction of walking. So if you hold onto the chair with both hands, just lightly touching it, you don't have to really grip it, and you want your arms to be straight, and you want to feel like you're just reaching a little bit. Feet are about shoulder width apart. And what we're going to do now, you're going to keep your chest up. I always kind of like to look at something maybe on the floor about 4 or 5 feet in front of you. And you're going to reach your hips back. Now your knees are just relaxed. They're not bent, and we're not bending them. It's all in the hips. So you're reaching back. Notice my back is relatively straight. I just don't want you to be hunched over. And then come up. Reach back. And when you reach back, the idea is to feel a stretch right in the backs of the legs and using your glutes to bring you upright. Reach back just as far as you can go, and then really use those glutes to squeeze up. So this is working muscles essentially opposite to forward walking. Now we're trying to work the backs of the legs and the glutes to give us that good support all the way around. Now this one, you want to try about 8 to 10 times at first. This one in particular shouldn't necessarily feel really challenging. Think about it more of a mobility movement or a little bit more of a stretching movement, a dynamic stretching movement. So with these 3 movements, essentially the goal is to take stress off the front of the hip and add in some variety in a way that's not going to flare up pain. I do also have a blog post on these exact movements that you can click down below and see if you'd rather read and actually watch the movement demonstrations that way. If you find this helpful, the next step I would recommend is checking out the free 4-day arthritis-friendly movement challenge. Essentially, this is 4 workouts that are going to be nice to your arthritic joints and are follow-along routines with me. They start a little easier and progress in difficulty a little bit each time. That's going to give you so many different ideas on how to add variety and how to build strength in ways that aren't going to further flare up pain. So you can check that link down below, or you can go to arthritisadventure.com/challenge. It's totally free, and I will see you on the inside.